Hello, my name is David Hernandez, and this is my oral presentation. I wrote my paper on Zionism, and the reason I wrote on this topic was because it is something that interests me a lot. My major is international securities and conflict resolutions, and Zionism and the creation of Israel has caused a lot of issues in the Middle East, and it's something we talk about in my class. And it's just something that interests me a lot. What I talked about more particularly is how Zionism became this modern day political movement. I'll fix my slides. And its origins, like where it started from, how modern day Zionism came about. Talk about the Dreyfus Affair, which according to many historians, is one of the key events in Zionism. And anti-Semitism, in Europe. I don't talk about why it existed or how it came about, but there was anti-Semitism during that time, especially in countries like Germany. Even before World War II, there was already, like a hatred or racism towards Jews. And then I talk about the influencers, people such as Nathan Burbanu. He's the one who he coined Zionism in the late 19th century. Because before that, the term Zionist didn't exist. And then there's some people, he worked alongside Theodore Herzl, who he turned Zionism into this political organization that it became. And they worked alongside together up until later on when they split up because of different ideas. And Theodore Herzl is the one who turned Zionism into this political organization that it was back then. Although before it became this political mobilizer, he was actually anti-Zionist. He thought that Jews should just, try to assimilate themselves into the culture that they're already in, which back then, much of Europe was very Christian, and Jews, for some reason, were seen as barbaric. And there was this idea that Jews had to change their lifestyle and services to match more of those of the Christians, so they wouldn't be seen as barbaric people. And they had to try to prove themselves to be, civilized people, so they could be accepted. But yeah, before that, that's what Theodore Herzl was for. He was more for assimilation. But then later on, after the Dreyfus Affair, he became this pro-Zionist. There's people of Christian Zionism who they supported Zionism, and they wanted a homeland for the Jewish people as a way to bring about a prophecy about the Messiah, Jesus, coming back down to earth to save everyone. And they also wanted to do it as a way to say basically a thank you to the Jews for giving them Jesus, but mainly to bring about that prophecy. They believed that if the Jews went back to their homeland, Jesus would come back down and bring about the end of times. Also, there were people like Orthodox Jews, who many of them were anti-Zionist. They believed that anybody forcing the creation of Israel was pretty much playing God, and by them forcing the creation of Israel, it wouldn't be miraculous anymore. So it wouldn't come from God. And they were very against Zionism. And they even went up to the UN during 1940s when this all was being talked about, the partition of Israel. They were still against it, although some of them did end up changing their views. But for the majority of them, commonly Orthodox Jews were anti-Zionist. I talk about events such as the Dreyfus Affair, which was when this French artillery officer, captain, he was accused of treason because someone found a letter in the German embassy that resembled his writing, and they were going to hang him, and they caused a lot of hatred for Jews in France. People started comparing him to Judas, who betrayed Jesus, him betraying France, his country. And it just only helped to increase hatred towards Jews in Europe, particularly this event in France. And according to many historians, this is actually, they consider this a key event that really did spark Zionism. And of course, during this time, there was a lot of mass immigration going on, Jews leaving Europe, going to America, or even going to Palestine, or would become Israel, which that caused a lot of fear in the Palestinians living there at the time. They thought Jews were coming over to take over the land. But actually, a lot of Jews were just going there just to be safe, and weren't trying to do any sort of forced takeover. And then you have the Holocaust, which it's not agreed on by historians, but there are those who believe that it was an influencer and helped to get the rest of the world to support Zionism. They felt bad for the Jews and what they went through. And a lot of Jews also felt scared afterwards, after the Holocaust, to return back to Europe. They didn't want to go back. They didn't feel safe. So there was a lot of Jewish displacement. And the UN at the time was trying to solve that Jewish displacement problem, which ended up being the creation of Israel. And then have the end results, which is Israel's creation. Happened in 1947. And with that, a lot of people think there came about the end of Zionism. But nowadays, this emerging idea of post-Zionism, which is trying to, there's a couple different views on it, but some of it, or one view of it is trying to get Jews and Palestinians to live together and, end the fighting or that's going on and just live together in peace. Another idea is to have Israel no longer be considered a Jewish state, but a state of citizens. And that's currently what's, going on ever since, or more is coming up about right now. And within the past, 50 years, it's kind of these developing ideas. But as far as Zionism goes, political Zionism, when it first came about, it started with what many would consider Dreyfus Affair, and as a starter for that Zionist movement, and ended, as many would say, in 1947 with the creation of Israel. And that's what my paper is on. I go about the origins and talk about the influences and key events that happened, and I touch on a lot more, get into more detail in the paper. But this is just a quick overview of it. Thank you very much for watching my presentation.